go over Module 3.2. It's just partially what we did yesterday, except for today you're going to be seeing fractions and decimals, whereas yesterday you were just working with whole numbers. The first chart at the top is actually really easy. It's kind of a review. It says sort the following based on what kind of rational numbers they would describe. So the first one says at sea level. And a while ago when we first learned about integers, we did stuff like this. So at sea level would mean 0 because it's not above or below. It's just at sea level. Below sea level, that would mean it would be negative number. Above sea level, you probably could figure all these out on your own. Positive. If you want to figure them out on your own, you can pause this and try it first. Below 0 degrees, so if it's below 0, that means it's getting into the negative temperatures, so that would mean negative. Above 0 degrees, that would mean it's getting into, it'd still be cold outside, but like the positive numbers. So positive. If the stock plummets, the word plummet means it's going down, so that would be negative. And then rise means something's going up, so that would be positive. The next table, it says the table shows the water level at a tidal basin at different times during the day. Graph the level for each time on the number line. So this is graphing decimals, but it's pretty easy because they're all like to the half, like 3.5, 2.5, which just means you go halfway between the two numbers on the number line. So let's graph A first. So at 4 a.m. it was at 3.5 feet. So 3.5 means it's exactly halfway between 3 and 4. So I'm going to put a dot there. B is at 2.5, so that would be right here, halfway between 2 and 3. Negative 0.5, so that's just like negative a half, which would mean it's between 0 and negative 1, right here. I'm not labeling them, I probably should have, but negative 2.5, so in between negative 2 and negative 3, so right here, and then positive 1/2, so that's between 0 and positive 1. So there's your dots. And then over on the side where it says B, C, D, E, those are questions about this graph. It says, how do you know where to graph negative 0.5? And if you were listening when I graphed it, I told you that any half number means it's between two whole numbers, and 0.5 is between 0 and negative 1. At what time or times is the sea level, or is the level closest to sea level? So sea level would be at 0. So look at 0 on your graph. And then which two dots are closest to it? It looks like there's two dots that are exactly the same distance at negative 1/2 and then positive 1/2. So if you look back in your chart, the negative 1/2 was at noon right here. And then the positive 1/2 was at 8 a.m. So it would be plural. At what times? There's two of them. So at noon and at 8 a.m. Sorry. Which point is located halfway between negative 3 and negative 2? You can look at your graph if you need to, but negative 2 is right here, negative 3 is right here, and halfway in between them would be negative 2.5. Which point is the same distance from 0 as D? This is why we should have labeled. So D is at negative 2.5, so that would be this technically. We'll label it now. Which one is exactly the same distance from 0? So look on the positive side, which number was exactly, or I guess which letter was exactly 2.5 units from 0? That would have been B. They're both 2.5 away, but one's positive and one's negative, meaning they're opposites of each other. Down to the bottom, absolute value. Yesterday when we reviewed absolute value, I had you guys write down that it's always positive because distance is measured in positive units. So if it says find the absolute value of the average temperatures from the chart, this is super easy. You just have to pay attention to the numbers. It says 2008, that's the year. The temperature is negative 3.2. So the absolute value of that would just be positive 3.2. Oops. This one, it says negative 5.4, so positive 5.4. Positive 0.8. Absolute value is the easiest. This is still going to be a positive 3.8 because absolute value is always positive. And that says negative 2, so that would just become positive 2. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, the bottom says graph each number on the number line, then use your number line to find each absolute value. So number 4, it says to graph negative 4.5. So the number line isn't numbered all the way. It just has 0 and then positive 5, negative 5. So we're going to have to count over 1, 2, 3, 4. And then negative 4.5 would be directly between 4 and 5. So that's where you graph it. And then you can use the number line to find the absolute value like this. So there's half a unit from 0, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. So hang on. There we go. Absolute value is 4.5. Number 5, it says 1 1/2. This is a fraction, and the easiest way to turn a fraction into a decimal, I think personally that it's easier to graph decimals on a number line, but if you know how to graph fractions, then go for it. This is a pretty easy one. But to make a fraction into a decimal, you just have to take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. So 1 divided by 2, that gives you 0.5. So your decimal would be, you still have to keep the whole number attached. It's 1 1/2, so it would just be 1.5. So you're going to graph a dot at positive 1.5, which is directly between 1 and 2, right there. And then the absolute value is always positive, so your absolute value is 1.5. And you could put it like this or like this. Next one, positive 4, so that would be right here. And the absolute value is just going to be 4. I'm not going to draw the little lines on the number line anymore because absolute value is so easy. 3 1 or negative 3 1/4. So the whole number is 3. To make it into a decimal, you divide 1 by 4, which would be 0.25. So we're going to have to graph this at 3.25. Negative 3.25. So let me change the color because I already have a lot of green because of the lines I drew. Here's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So here's the negative 3 right here, and here's the negative 4 right here. Negative 3.25, think of it as money. 25 cents is less than 50 cents, and 50 is at half. So you're going to have to go a little bit before half right here. And then the absolute value is just 3 1/4 or 3.25. Like this. All right, I'm going to show you an extra few examples of how to make fractions into decimals. So on 1 2/5, you'd have to take 2 and divide it by 5, which would become 0.4. So your decimal is 1.4. 1 3/4, you'd have to take 3 and divide it by 4. Some of you guys already know these easy ones, like 1/4, 3/4, 1/2. But 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. So that would become 1.75. The whole number just sticks with it. So if I were to ask you to compare these, that would mean this one is larger. This would be like $1.40, the other would be $1.75. 3 1/4, 1 divided by 4, I believe we've already done that once somewhere on here, but 1 divided by 4, your calculator would give you 0.25, which makes it 3.25. And then 3 4/5, so you'd have to punch in 4 divided by 5. That's a beautiful 4. And 4 divided by 5 is going to give you 0.80, so 3.8, which in this case, this would be $3. Even though this has one more digit, it's 0.25. The other one's just 0.8. Think of it as money, so that would be $3.25, whereas this one would be $3.80. So this one is larger. Make sure that you've got all that copied down. If you guys need the use of a calculator to make the fractions into decimals, go for it. I ask that you just don't use the one on your phone, and then glue these into your notebook.